I love lists. I make shopping lists and menu lists and to-do lists. Ryan and I just made this 10 by 10 list, 10 games that we want to play in 2021. This is a thing for some people do. And I have some apps that I put my shopping list on and my church list on. Once in a while, I actually sit down with my markers and my fancy pens and I make pretty lists in my book here. But usually I just end up writing lists just on random notebook pages, on like random pieces of paper and sticky notes that I then find months later, and I can be amused and wonder, why did I write Facebook cats, puppies on a list with Jesse Jackson? I don't know. But it made sense at the time, and it helped me do something I assumed that I needed to get done. And I peg this lawyer here in Luke 10 as a list maker, right? He's got this to-do list, and he comes and he asks Jesus like the question for the ultimate to-do list item, right? What must I do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus does what Jesus does and turns the question around and asks it to the lawyer, and the lawyer, he has his list. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus says, that's right, do this and you will live. But here's the thing. I don't often get out my Greek New Testament, but I did it this week. The story of the Good Samaritan, the man says, what should I do? And Jesus says, do this and you will live. But the verb to do, there's two different tenses there. And for the grammar nerds in the crowd, the lawyer's what should I do is an aorist tense, which just means he's asking about something, a one-time concrete action that he can do, right, to check it off the list. Jesus, do this and you will live, is present tense, which in Greek, as in English, often indicates the kind of thing that you just keep doing on a regular basis, right? Like, I brush my teeth. I walk the dogs. I procrastinate on my sermons. These aren't once and done checkmark things. My dogs want to be walked twice a day. And sermons need to be written at least 3 times a month, right? These are ongoing things. So Jesus isn't quite answering the question that the lawyer asked. The lawyer wants one thing to do once and check it off. And Jesus is saying, you need to regularly act in love towards your neighbor. Love God. I imagine the priest and the Levite were probably also list makers. In my experience, you need lists to be able to organize worship services and lead congregations. They would have needed lists of the imperfections they were looking for on the animals that were brought in for sacrifice. They would have needed lists of the worship supplies they needed, of the items in the temple that needed cleaned, of the hymns, the psalms that would be sung in the service. And since they're heading away from Jerusalem, they may also be thinking of lists of things that they messed up, that they should do different next time, or lists of the things they need to do at home since they've been gone for a while. And you know that Martha was a list maker. Right? She's got this whole list in her head of all the things that need to happen for her to be able to host Jesus and the disciples. And this I can sympathize with, because like back in the days when we could invite people into our homes safely, if I knew people were coming over, I would wake up with a list in my head. And just as I would check one thing off, I would add 3 more things as I went through the day and notice the dirty windows or the dirty carpet. And I also sympathize with Martha's irritation that Mary is not helping check items off the list. There have been times when certain people in my household don't seem to understand what is required to host a party and will say play a card game or practice guitar 2 hours before we have people coming over, when my list is still like 20 items long. So I get Martha in this moment saying, tell Mary to help me. I have this long list of things that need done, and she's just sitting there. Jesus says that Martha is worried and distracted by many things. And aren't we all? Right? I'm convinced that throughout this whole passage, in both of these stories, the determining factor in which character is able to be faithful to what God is calling them to in the moment, and which characters are not able to do that, is all about distraction. Because it's not that the priest and the Levite are bad people, right? They're not presented as these horrible people who wish ill to vulnerable strangers on the side of the road. It's not. It's just that they have other things to do. And it's not that the Good Samaritan is necessarily a better person. One of the podcasts I listened to, the guy referred to this as the parable of the Samaritan who's sometimes good, right? Like, he's never called the Good Samaritan in the story. That's a label we put on. He does a good thing. And it's interesting, when you read through the passage, it says that the priest was going down the road, and the Levite came to that place, but the Samaritan is traveling. And Jesus doesn't elaborate, but I wonder if that gives us a little bit of a clue as to why the Samaritan is the one who stops, because maybe this traveling mentality makes him a little less distracted, opens up a little bit of space. Maybe he's not in as much of a hurry to get to the next place that he's going, and so he can really see and tend to this person that God has in his path. And Martha, she's not presented in any kind of negative way. She's a disciple, a beloved disciple who's taking care of Jesus. And there's a tenderness in Jesus' response when she complains about Mary and Jesus says, Martha, Martha, right? Like that feels very tender. Jesus is not so much condemning Martha as wanting to affirm Mary's choice, to say that she is not required to serve him in this traditional way, that she is welcome to listen and learn and be a disciple the way that she is choosing to be a disciple. This particular story is the only place we meet Mary and Martha in Luke's gospel, but we see them in John's gospel. They're the sisters of Lazarus. And we're told that Mary is the one who anoints Jesus' feet with the expensive oil and wipes them with her hair. So that tracks, right? Mary is the one who is less responsible, less practical than her sister, less appropriate in the things that she does. So the priest and the Levite and Martha, these stories don't present them as bad people, just as people who are missing out on some of the good things that God has for them, people who are missing out on opportunities to show love to their neighbor and opportunities to sit at the feet of Jesus and listen. They all three perform important religious functions, right? Tending to worship in the temple, providing food for the disciples, which I assume Jesus is happy to eat. Once Martha has prepared it. So, Jesus doesn't tell them they're doing bad things or that they shouldn't have their lists, but he does show how people who are a little less focused, a little less driven by their lists, may have more openness to noticing God in their midst. And it's not that lists are bad. They can be super helpful. It's good that the lawyer knew the list of commandments. It's good that the priest knew the list of blemishes for sacrificial animals. It's good that the Levite knew the list of hymns. And it's good that Martha knew the list of ingredients she needed for Jesus' favorite stew. Right? Good lists. It's not about lists being bad. My shopping lists keep me from needing to go to the grocery store 6 times a week, and my to-do lists keep me from dropping even more balls than I otherwise would in trying to tend to the needs of the church. Our lists can be really helpful. And so as I've been thinking about these stories, I've been trying to figure out that balance and trying to think about what does this say? I don't think it says lists are bad altogether. But what really has made the difference? Why did the Samaritan stop and help? And why did Mary feel the freedom to sit and listen? How were they able to pay attention to what God was doing when people around them were so distracted? There's was a study done at a seminary. It's kind of infamous, and you may have heard it before, but the idea was that they sent seminary students from one building on campus to preach a sermon in another building, and along the way there was someone staged who needed their help, right? So you know where this is going. They wanted to see who would stop and help on their way to preach the sermon. And what they found was that the topic of the sermon did not matter. People could be preaching on the Good Samaritan and literally walk right by someone suffering on the side of the road. What made a difference was how much time the student felt like they had. If the student was in a hurry, felt like they were running late, then they would not stop to help. If the student was running early and felt like they had plenty of time, they most often did stop and help. And this past Wednesday, we had our first youth check-in. I was missing the youth of the church. I haven't seen most of them since we did baptism class a while back. A couple of them were in that, but I haven't seen most of them since we quit meeting in person for worship. So it was a delight to get to catch up. And I was just asking, how are you doing? How is COVID time going for you? And I think I've talked to too many stressed out adults, because I was really surprised that all three of them told me, I have more time. And they told me about having time. They're making artwork, and they're making music, and they're watching movies online with their friends. And it was lovely to hear about the time and the space that they felt in their lives. I thought, these are people who are in a place where they would stop if they saw someone in need, where they could sit down and listen at the feet of Jesus. And I realize, of course, that having time is easier said than done, right? Our schedules fill up, our responsibilities accumulate, and we have so many plans for doing good things that sometimes it's hard for us to do the good things that show up right in front of us. So if you are feeling like Martha, if you're feeling distracted by many things, if you're feeling overwhelmed by your tasks and responsibilities and your lists, I encourage you to prayerfully consider how you might be able to create some space for attentiveness and faithfulness, how you could travel at a little more leisurely pace. And not to get rid of your list, but maybe let them control you a little less. Maybe you could say no to something or to a few things. Maybe you could practice Sabbath. Set your list aside for an entire day, or just start with a few hours if you need to, but set it aside and do Sabbath. Maybe you start your day with a prayer that God will help you pay attention to the people that God brings to you that day. Or you end your day with an examine, thinking about, where did you see God throughout the day? What opportunities did you miss in the day? And how might you do better the next day? I realize that this idea of making space, it's not going to look the same for everybody, and the things that work for me aren't going to work for you. And the absolute last thing that we want to happen is for making space to become another item on the to-do list, something else that you are trying to check off. That defeats the whole purpose. Like the lawyer, we might feel like we want to know the one thing that we can do to be good and faithful people. The one thing to check the box. But we hear these words from Jesus. Keep on doing this. Keep on loving God and loving your neighbor. Do this and you will live.